All right, what's up, everybody? Hope you all have had a good week, and wanted to use this video to kind of come off of last week's update where I talked a lot about learnings and some of the things that I'd learned doing some user testing on the Healthcare OS prototype. Things like working on the system and working on different pieces of data, working on different pieces of content. The On Deck program, some of the people there have been really helpful in kind of pinpointing a lot of different data sources to use for essentially filler data. So I've been really thankful for all of you guys or everybody who is part of On Deck who has reached out and kind of offered to either help with that or who pointed me to some different resources that have been really, really fantastic. So, but this week what I wanted to do is kind of go on to the next iteration. So part of the design process and part of kind of this whole user-centered design process is, you kind of take you take some ideas, you kind of put together a hypothesis, very similar to a scientific method. You put together a hypothesis, your initial design, you put it in front of people, you test it, and then you essentially make a judgment call about your original hypothesis. And in this case, for design, you actually make an update, you iterate, you change things. And so for this, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the next steps beyond kind of what I discussed with different cleanicians. And so in this process, I've been working a lot on this kind of modular card approach here. I've talked about that on a number of occasions now, but if you're not familiar or if it's been a minute since you have seen that, I'll just kind of briefly reiterate what that looks like. And so basically the idea is to modularize this content that normally lives inside a patient chart, and really just any part of this system is modularizing all of this content so that's accessible and digestible and usable at any time that a clinician needs it. So this might not just be the patient chart, although that's the example we're going to work with today, but in the future it might be different types of messaging. It might be it might be multiple patients at once. It could be any number of things. And so this modular idea is to kind of build these cards or add these cards next to each other in a succession or a flow for a particular item. So that could be an appointment, or it could be a name, or sorry, not a name. It could be a message. It could be results. It could be any number of things. But again, for example purposes, we're working with the appointment methodology. And so you kind of have these different cards that you can add on, and they basically represent different pieces of data that a clinician might need to access. And so, part of the challenge with this in the past has been actually getting usable data. I kind of know some things about what would go in here, but I am by no means a doctor. I am by no means not even I'm not a nurse, I'm not anything. I don't really have any qualifications. And so the hardest thing for me is getting things that are usable and understandable and relevant and accurate for the clinicians. And I talked a little bit about that accuracy last week with the different data that we put in here. So now that I've been able to get some more accurate data that's been anonymized and properly kind of de-identified, that has brought up a whole new list of challenges, and I'm really excited that those challenges exist. I'm really excited that we get to face those, but those challenges do come with a list of new roadblocks, and so I want to talk a little bit about that today, and specifically in the context of these modules. So you can see here that this appointment card is very different than what we've been looking at in the past, where in the past we only have 2 items. In fact, for this woman who's 53 years old, she's more likely to have a pretty wide variety of problems, or a large condition list or problem list. And so I actually added in, I think there are about, so there are about 10 or 11, 12, somewhere like in there, conditions in this list, which right here, this actually could present a new problem where that 2 item in that list looks okay, but when you get this, it's kind of like, okay, now you're starting to kind of flex the capabilities of what this design presents. And so, this is one of those changes. Another change is adding a medication list. And medication list is actually the one I want to look at today specifically, because I've got a couple different examples of this here. I've got another example down here. where I've kind of got some exploration going on. I'm actually going to drag these together for easier viewership. Um, and so I wanted to discuss a little bit of this challenge or of this problem of how do you make this content modular and the modularity of content in general. And the reason I want to specifically use a medication list is because this is one of those things that pretty much no matter what doctor, what type of physician a patient goes to see, nearly every single physician, every good physician anyway, will most likely need to look at the medication list. So this is obviously for primary care, but this would be for sure for any specialist that a patient goes to, for anything. They're going to, if they go to inpatient, if they get admitted to the ER or to the hospital, they go in for a procedure, if they go in for imaging, they're going to want to see the medication list. And that's because there are just so many things that could go wrong between different medications that a patient might be taking, different procedures, different solutions, or kind of essentially different things that someone can do to kind of resolve a diagnosis or a problem. And so I want to talk about this medication list because it is kind of so varied. And the thing that I want to kind of really drive home here is that the challenge with modular content is that this content is used differently depending on the context. Now, let me give you a pretty specific example about this. Let's say you go to see your primary care physician, or this patient does. Priscilla Edwards goes to see her primary care physician, and maybe it's been a year, maybe 6 months since she's been there. And so there are a couple things that before a physician goes into a room, they're going to be reviewing the patient's chart, and they're usually going to be looking at a couple different things: the problem list, the chief complaint, and the medication list. Now, the medication list, as we're seeing here, is one of those things that will change the results, or not the results, but will change some of the things that a physician may focus on when they go into that room. So you can see here that Priscilla has 6 different medications. There's 9 different, 6 medications. I think the actual data that we have, the data set we have, is actually, I think she's on like 12 medications, so even this is actually pretty short compared to what it fully is. But, so a clinician is going to look at this and see this in conjunction with her chief complaint. They're going to see this in conjunction with most likely her active conditions, and they're going to see this in conjunction potentially with any recent lab results, any procedures, any other visits that Priscilla may have had between the last time she saw her primary care and this particular visit. And all of those things can impact what a physician needs to do with this information within this list. Probably going in, this list is really just going to be informational. It's just really helping them get a kind of a picture and a view of, okay, Priscilla's taking aspirin, 81 milligram tablet once daily. That's a pretty common thing for heart conditions. They're taking some of these other medications, which I don't really know what they do, but they're all there in this list, right? And because of that, they can make some assumptions both about maybe what the patient is there to do. Maybe they need a refill. Maybe they may be having a problem with one of the medications, or maybe the medication isn't fully solving the problem. And so they're very much just an informational view. Now, when a physician is in the room with the patient, there may be more discussion around, okay, you're taking this or this, and is that working? Is it making it worse? Is it making it better? Are you having any problems, et cetera, et cetera? All of those things would be a part of this conversation. And so, but at the end of the visit, when a physician is done, particularly if it's a kind of a routine kind of wellness visit type of situation, the physician's probably just going to be doing things like refills, maybe upping the dosage, potentially changing it altogether depending on what other options are available. And so at that point, the information about the medication list, during the actual appointment or post-appointment, when they're doing kind of the visit wrap-up and signing, where they might be looking at this particular screen or a screen like it, that's a very different context. And so over the last couple days, particularly over this weekend, I was really struggling with, okay, how do we represent this data? Because we can represent it as these little cards here. We can represent it kind of in a list here. I even had, I think I had some other options here where we kind of had another list here where, or this was for, sorry, this is for conditions. That's another equally important version of this conversation. But both of those options can present their own types of challenges or successes. So with this card view, and this is something that I kind of want to implement across the system, so this might, so as of now, this is the version that I'm going to go with. But with this card view, we could potentially have a drag and drop where someone drags this card, drops it here, and it turns into this card, where you now have a more detailed view. You see aspirin by mouth once daily, there are a certain number of refills left, the reason, when it was prescribed, and maybe the pharmacy, and then some actions, so like refill, change the pharmacy, whatever that might be. And even that is a little bare right at the moment, in my opinion. But on the other hand, with these cards, how do you then translate that into this appointment view? Where, in the past, what we've worked with, in terms of adding a prescription is kind of this kind of flow, this kind of stepped card approach where you kind of have, your prescription, you can search for the medication, type in the name, maybe there's some suggestions based on extracted information out of the note or the visit or diagnosis. You can then fill in all the information. So how do you then bridge these two options? How do you bridge these two things, and how do you create that consistency? Because ultimately, the most important thing here is to create consistency. So I don't know that I have a clear answer on this yet. You can see that I've got another version of this medication list with a list. It's a more traditional kind of a table-like list. In a slightly different design where maybe there's a map included, but that also doesn't seem like that's really relevant to a physician. They just need to kind of know which pharmacy and what the address might be. So yeah, so there's a lot of different kind of context here and different information. And to be honest, over the weekend, this was kind of kicking my butt a little bit in terms of like, okay, how do we actually handle this? And how do we handle some of these really different types of content where, with a note, it's pretty easy because it's really just a certain amount of plain text or just free text, essentially, things like that. So yeah, like I said, don't have a clear answer on this quite yet. Don't have a clear direction yet. If you have thoughts, please let me know. I'd love to hear them. But it is most likely going to be something that requires some testing. And so putting this in front of a physician or two or three, say like, okay, what do you think about this? What other kind of information would you need? How do you kind of perceive this, and how would you kind of think about this as you were trying to work through it? And that will most likely mean building these things. So this is coming back to the building and saying like, okay, now it's actually time to build a couple of these versions of this card. I think that's a good use for the style guide page, where I can add those cards to this page and kind of have a lot of different options here. And then, we can more easily, hopefully, see all the different iterations or ideas therein. So yeah, so this week is a pretty short week, pretty short video. I hope you enjoyed it, but yeah, so definitely a lot of content to go through, a lot of information to go through. I'm going to still be plugging away at this, still going to be trying to figure it out. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of keep digging in, and we'll keep you posted, of course, on any new updates by next week. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.